in the olden days, the only reason that you would have bought a Hyundai was, well, you probably wouldn't have bought a Hyundai. The only reason your grandma bought one was because it had a 5-year warranty. And Hyundai is now working very, very hard to change that. They're going rallying, they've built some fantastic hot hatchbacks, and now it reckons it can take on the toughest job in the whole car industry. And that is build an electric Tesla rival that you will want to own. Now it's called the Ioniq 5, and I'm no mathematician, but I reckon that means that if this thing is a success, then there'll be smaller Ioniq 2s or 3s and maybe a bigger Ioniq 6 or 7. Now, I don't know about you, but when I first saw the pictures of this thing, it played tricks on my head. I couldn't work out if it was a tiny, titchy little city car like a Honda E or something much bigger. It's actually longer and wider and just a little bit less tall than a Range Rover Evoque. It's a big family crossover, and that's because underneath it's based on Hyundai's all-new electric car platform. So you know the drill. Batteries down here, floor gets higher, room for 5 people inside, and a big boot. Okay, now we'll go through all the big nerdy numbers in a minute, but first we need to have a talk about the design of this thing, don't we? Because it's like a 1980s hot hatchback that's come back from the future. Up front, there's a kind of grille that only appears when lights shine through the front panel. The doors look like my first ever attempt at ironing my school uniform. And at the back, there's hundreds and hundreds of LEDs giving it a kind of angry robot vibe. Now, what's interesting about this is Hyundai hasn't done what almost every other car maker has done when trying to build an electric car. They haven't played it safe and tried not to scare you away from the future. They've deliberately built a head turner. So now it's got your attention, let's get the cold, hard numbers out of the way. The first choice to make is how big a battery you want. Either a 54 kilowatt hour in the base model or 72.6 kilowatt hours if you're going to upgrade. Then there's a choice of motors, either rear wheel drive with 167 horsepower, good for 0 to 60 in about 8.5 seconds, or twin dual motors, meaning 4-wheel drive, just over 300 horsepower and 0 to 60 in 5.2 seconds. Depending on which combination you go for, you're going to be good for up to 290 miles of claimed range or 0 to 60 in about 5 seconds. Now, instead of continuing to pretend it's the 1980s inside the Ioniq 5, Hyundai's just gone ahead and built, well, your lounge. These seats have a built-in footrest and they can recline flat like a bed so you can have a nap while the car's recharging. At front, I've got two 12.3-inch screens. This one's a touch-sensitive screen with my Apple Android connectivity. Here I've got all my driving information so I can see my range and how much power's going to each motor. And then down here, a touch-sensitive display with the heater and climate controls. Now, this one is a pre-production prototype, so it might be a little bit rough around the edges, but I have to say, for certain Hyundai badge snobs, they might be a bit impressed to get in here and find that Hyundai's luxury electric car is better built than they might expect. Now, what Hyundai's done is maximize those juicy advantages that building a bespoke electric car brings you when you don't have to package a big bulky engine or a gearbox or a hot exhaust. So look, flat floor, that allows the center console to slide backwards and forwards. Then there's the wheelbase. That's the distance between the front wheels and the back wheels. That's 3 meters long in the Ioniq 5. That's longer than the wheelbase of a BMW 5 Series. And the result of that means that 6-foot me can sit behind 6-foot me's driving position. And look, I've got loads of knee room and foot room and headroom, and there's still plenty of space behind me for a big boot and a secret locker to hide the charging cable. It's been well thought out in here. As for price, all we've been able to look around so far is a tricked out kind of first edition that should be about £45,000. But the main Ioniq 5 range will be priced so it sits just above the Kona Electric in Hyundai's UK family. Now, because this Ioniq 5 is strictly a pre-production prototype and it's quite precious, I'm probably not supposed to be whizzing about on a country lane, but you seem like a trustworthy type, so I won't tell if you won't. I think the first thing you'll notice when you're out here in the real world in an Ioniq 5 is just how high up you sit. I know we said earlier this thing is kind of like a normal crossover that's pretending to be a lower hatchback, but you just sit up tall. You can see over hedges and you sit eye to eye with van drivers. Handling's, well, straight out of the modern electric car textbook, really. You can sense the weight's nice and low down. You've got really light, accurate steering. Nothing especially kind of entertaining, but it's just an efficient and easy way of getting about, and the ride is exceptional. 4 levels of regen. I can adjust those on the paddles, so for city driving there is a kind of 1 pedal mode. Just lift off and the car will come to a smart stop, putting as much power as you can back into the battery. Or there we go, I've just erased that and now the car will coast, foot completely off the throttle, and it's just taking me along like we're being pushed by the wind. 0 to 60 in 5.2 seconds for this one, and predictably feels pretty quick in that typically seamless, effortless, but not particularly dramatic electric car way. I've got a button on the steering wheel here that can change between eco and sport mode. Yep, that definitely feels a little bit more sprightly. But yeah, you're not going to be swapping this for an i30N. It's not a sporty Hyundai. So the Ioniq 5 is sized and kind of performance matched to go head to head with stuff like the Volkswagen ID4, and there's the Ford Mustang Mach-E, and of course the Teslas, the Model 3 and the Model Y. So what's going to set this car apart from those guys? Well, it's probably the charging infrastructure. That's the infrastructure on board the car. You see, this car has got 800 volt charging capacity, and the only other electric car in the world that offers that right now is the Porsche Taycan. So why is that interesting? Well, for a start, it means that if you can find a 350 kilowatt, very rapid charger, this thing will go from 10 to 80% charged in just 18 minutes. But it's also about the way you can reuse the charge you've already got. So if you've got a friend with an electric car and they call you and they say, "Oh, help, I've broken down, you need to come and rescue me," turn up in your Ioniq 5, plug in a lead between the two cars, and the Ioniq 5 can actually gift charge to another stranded electric car. Or even this, you could go camping, say. Your friend says, "Oh, we've bought a fridge but nowhere to plug it in and now the beer's getting warm." No problem. You plug the fridge into the Ioniq 5 and you can run a household appliance from it. There's even a gimmick, and this is where I start to struggle with some of these ideas a little bit, but maybe it's the future. Apparently what you can do if you've got a full charge and you almost don't need it is sell power that you've already got in the battery back to the national grid at kind of peak demand times. You could almost rent out the charge you've already got. Now, that could be a really cool plan, but I think I'd be waiting for the public charging infrastructure to improve to be a lot more reliable than it currently is before I start gifting and giving away my precious range. So that's given you a quick look all around and a cheeky test drive of the Ioniq 5. And what have you learned? Well, obviously Hyundai still knows how to do all the boring and the practical stuff well enough to impress your nan. But more than that, you've just watched all the way to the end of a review of a Korean hatchback, and that proves that anything is desirable when it looks this retro and edgy.